I was born when the story was already at its end. My mother, Wen, was the villainess of the tale, betrayed by the man who was my father. She fell from her pedestal as a pampered heiress to become a social pariah, scorned by all. But for my sake, she decided to start her life over from nothing. The nurses told me that when Mom was about to give birth, she had no idea she was even pregnant. When a sharp pain seized her stomach, she took her last 20,000 yuan and rushed to the hospital. Even then, she insisted on a VIP room, refusing to be crowded in with strangers. Just like that, her 20,000 became 2,000. She had never imagined having a child. Unprepared, she was utterly stunned the first time she saw me. Even when she had loved my father the most, she never wanted to bear his child, afraid his love would be divided. They had sworn to each other when they were young. Kinchi's love was for Wen alone. In the beginning, my father truly had eyes only for my mother. At 18, Kinchi told her, "I love you. Only you." Everyone in their circle knew that Kinchi belonged to Wen. My mother was possessive, and their friends would often tease, "The heiress jealousy is so strong." To the 18-year-old Kinchi, her possessiveness was sweet. But to the 24-year-old Kinchi, it was suffocating. Every shrill ring of his phone made his heart sink. When stifled emotions find no outlet, the heart opens a window elsewhere. And so, he strayed. He fell for another woman. He knew he was wronging Wen, so he hid it. At first, the guilt held some weight on the scales, but the stolen moments of happiness began to pile up, tipping the balance entirely. When the web of lies finally unraveled, their world collapsed in a storm of chaos. They hurled insults at each other, their fights turning their house into a war zone, until they swore to never see each other again. On the day they signed the divorce papers, my mother stared at the signed agreement for a long, long time. Someone beside her asked if there was a problem. "So many years," she murmured. "I should at least say a proper goodbye." She then picked up the papers, rose to her feet, and said with bone-deep exhaustion, "I hope we never meet again." A month later, the Wen family went bankrupt. My mother learned the news as she was preparing to move. The house had been co-owned, but there was no reason to stay. When she drove back, all that remained was an empty shell. She never thought she could have a child in circumstances like these. She had lost everything, but she had gained a child. This child was like a fast-forward button, instantly cleaving her life in two. Despite the shock, she accepted this new reality. Then she discovered she couldn't even manage her own basic needs, let alone a baby's. She didn't know a taxi ride from her old home to the hospital cost 12 yuan. She didn't realize how expensive her old meals were. She couldn't even afford a fraction of what she used to order so casually. Her spending habits remained, always wanting the best of everything. She was forced to learn how to care for herself, and forced to learn how to care for a child. She had never wanted a child, but she seemed to adore me. She would hold me constantly, gently nuzzling my little face, holding my tiny hand, and whispering softly to me. When the nurses took care of me, she would watch from the side, clumsily trying to learn. The trashy novels on her phone were all deleted, replaced with guides on parenting. Though, more often than not, she'd fall asleep reading them. I loved to gaze at my mother's sleeping face. Asleep, she was like the climbing roses outside the window, swaying gently in the wind, serene and beautiful. When I slept, she would gently pat me. She would whisper to the nurse, "What kind of formula is best for a baby this small?" The nurse would whisper back, "You can try this brand. Your baby is so small and thin, she wasn't well nourished in the womb." My mother looked at the exorbitant price, then at me, blowing bubbles in my cradle, and hesitated. In the end, she gritted her teeth and bought a whole case. After the purchase, another zero vanished from her bank account. She was left with 200. Although I was well cared for at the hospital, I slept constantly and often seemed to have trouble breathing. My mother didn't notice anything was wrong, simply calling me her little piggy for sleeping 24 hours a day. Then, a nurse gave me a full checkup. The doctor said I had a congenital heart defect and would likely not live to adulthood. For the first few days after the diagnosis, my mother just held me and cried. Her postpartum month wasn't even over, and the doctor warned her against crying so much. He asked who my father was. Sobbing, my mother couldn't answer. Her life felt as if it had been severed by a knife. She had spent 20 years in a whirlwind of luxury, and fate, deciding she'd had it too easy, made her a mother without teaching her how. As if that pain wasn't enough, it twisted the knife deeper. The head nurse looked on, displeased. Such a fine young woman, how did she end up with a man like that? Then she patted my mother's back, comforting her. They even brought in a psychologist to prevent postpartum depression. The nurse would often look at me and sigh. She said that at first, she disliked my mother, finding her so ill-suited for motherhood. Later, she pitied her. She saw women like my mother several times a year. Perhaps because I was so quiet and cute, the nurse felt a need to look after me a little more, unable to bear the thought of me becoming an orphan. But no matter how much sympathy others offered, the mountain of medical bills crushed my mother. In the past, to salvage her unsalvageable relationship, she had done countless humiliating things. She had groveled, poured her family's money into his ventures, and even publicly thrown red wine on his new love interest, sabotaging the woman's career. All she had ever wanted, since she was a little girl, was for someone to help her up when she fell, not to laugh at her. And since childhood, only Kinchi had ever done that. Her own parents, exhausted by their loveless marriage, had no energy to raise a child. So she grew up willful and unruly, with no one to guide her, only people who bowed to her status. Without that gilded armor, she was like a new bud on a branch, easily withered by the slightest wind and rain. She knew this, but she didn't know how to claim the love she'd never received, how to hold on to that fragile affection. In the end, she grasped nothing. She had only wanted to protect a love that was as easily scattered as dust. Taking several deep breaths, she began calling the friends she thought were close. But the calls were met with either dead air or curses. On the last call, she hesitated for a long time. "Who is this?" the person on the other end asked. "Jiaja, it's me. Oh, I was wondering who it was. The great Miss Win. To what do I owe the honor?" The voice was thick with sarcasm. "I need to borrow some money." "How much are you thinking?" My mother stated a number. Before she could finish, the person on the other end let out a derisive laugh. "Aren't you the great heiress? A wave of your hand was worth millions. Why are you asking a small fry for a few thousand? I have the money, but in your current state, it's unlikely you could pay it back. How about this? You bark like a dog a few times. Maybe my heart will soften, and he'll lend it to you." After he spoke, a wave of laughter erupted from the phone. They weren't just mocking her, they were letting everyone know that she was now a plaything for their amusement. But this time, my mother didn't hang up abruptly as she usually would. "Was I not good to you before?" she asked. The laughter on the other end suddenly died down. "Yes, you were very good to me. But you owed me that. You were born rich, possessing wealth I could never attain in several lifetimes. I used to pray for your downfall. And now that you've fallen, I'm ecstatic. I'm celebrating with everyone right now, celebrating your ruin, and the fact that there's one more person in the world just like us." My mother didn't hear the rest. She held the phone and slowly sat down in front of me, gently stroking my blanket. She thought about the people who used to surround her. As an heiress, no matter how awful she was, she had countless sycophants. Ling Ling had been her favorite friend, because she always seemed to care genuinely. She didn't indulge her every whim but treated her as an equal. She would condemn the excesses of the rich and the bitterness of the poor. She would prepare study notes for her before exams and tell her not to cheat. When my mother did something wrong, Ling Ling would give her the cold shoulder but also patiently try to guide her. She was like family. But now that the fame and fortune were gone, she was a stranger. She mocked and scorned her just like the others, kicking her while she was down. Finally, my mother put down the silent phone. From her meager collection of clothes, she took out a scarf and set it aside to be discarded. Faced with a barrage of payment reminders, my mother dialed that one number. The first thing she heard was a mix of male and female laughter, then the familiar, hello. In the past, when she called him, she would have chirped a sweet, Kinchi, but now, she could only manage a formal, stiff reply. "Kinchi, it's me." Her voice was slow, wooden. "Can you lend me some money?" More laughter echoed from the other end, then the rustle of fabric. "Don't," a female voice jiggled. His voice returned to the phone. "What did you say?" Just that one sentence, and it seemed my mother lost all courage to ask again. After all, their ending had been so ugly. To get their divorce, they had clawed at each other with vicious words. They had fought often throughout their lives, but never with such ferocity. The Kinchi of the past had been like a brilliant light to my mother. Though that light couldn't reach the deepest shadows, it had at least brought her a moment of warmth. She never thought that once the divorce papers were signed, the past would simply be the past. With no other choice, my mother decided to seek refuge with my grandmother, her own mother, who lived far away in Jianmen. When my mother was 18, my grandmother had divorced her husband. Years of torment had turned much of her hair white, and she had been on antidepressants for year after year. When my mother was a child, my grandmother would always stay alone in her room. She never went out, never spoke. Sometimes, she would just stare at the white curtains. Once, my mother went to see her and found her trying to swallow a handful of white pills. The pills choked her. When she saw my mother, she spat them out, scattering them across the floor. The nanny, hearing the commotion, rushed in. "Madam, you can't take so many of these. If you really can't sleep, I'll warm you a glass of milk." My grandmother stared blankly at the pills on the floor before finally shaking her head. My mother walked over and took her hand. So small, she didn't understand what depression was. She only knew her grandmother was sick. My grandmother seemed not to feel her presence, her gaze fixed on something far away. After that, my mother never opened that door again. One day, when my mother was an adult, that perennially closed door finally opened. A woman, so pale she was almost translucent, emerged. It was her mother. The nanny carried her suitcase. She was leaving this house forever. She didn't look back at my mother, as if she had never given birth to her at all. And now, The only person she could rely on was this mother she hadn't seen in so long. Her stepmother and father had abandoned her and fled the country as soon as the bankruptcy hit. My mother spent every last cent she had on a ticket for a green skin train. She had never been on such a train. It was crammed with luggage and trash, making it difficult to even move. A tiny table was shared between 4 seats, barely big enough for 2 hands. When she finally found her seat, the cloth cover was greasy. A portly man sat next to her, the reek of stale smoke filling the air. As soon as my mother sat down, her eyes reddened. Her white dress, the only one she had kept, was already stained in several places. She had sold everything else she could. He slept the entire way to my grandmother's house. When I opened my eyes, I heard my grandmother scolding my mother. All you've known since birth is how to spend money. It's your own foolishness that brought you to this. My mother ate noodles while she cried. To afford the train ticket, she had made 1 meal last for 3, and had barely eaten her fill. My grandmother's hair was streaked with silver, her features serene but wary. Though her words were sharp, her eyes held an undeniable mix of joy and reproach, the look of a mother whose daughter had finally grown up and come home. Grandmother lived in a tranquil little courtyard in Jianmen. Her life there was peaceful. Roses climbed the walls inside and out. When the alley wind blew, the flowers would sway gently. A stone table sat in the yard, upon which a fluffy, round white cat often lay. On sunny days, it would nap beside the roses. My grandmother had never thought she would see her daughter again. Now, she could finally sit quietly and look at her mother. From birth, my mother had been born with a silver spoon. At that time, my grandmother was already deep in a severe depression. From ages 1 to 5, they barely saw each other. By the time my mother turned 18, my grandmother's illness had finally improved. She wanted to take her daughter away, but years of neglect had fostered a deep resentment in my mother. Without proper guidance, my mother grew up knowing only how to spend money. She had never truly worked for anything, even her diploma was the result of her family donating a building to the university. Not only did she love spending money, she loved giving it away. Later, she saw nothing wrong with it. I had so much money back then, she'd say. What was wrong with giving some away? Who could have known that money would become meaningless in an instant? My mother thought that by moving in with my grandmother, her life would be carefree again. But my grandmother did not spoil her. Except for expenses related to me, she gave my mother nothing. From then on, my mother and grandmother argued constantly. She could no longer wear her beautiful old clothes, buy expensive makeup, or eat at fancy restaurants. My mother's face would turn red with anger. Her beautifully dyed hair faded, its curls straightened. She wore my grandmother's old shirts. Before coming here, my mother cried often. Now, she didn't cry anymore. She just got angry, like a child denied candy. At my grandmother's, my mother learned to cook. Every day, she would follow my grandmother into the yard to prune the flowers and do chores she would never have touched before. Sometimes, she would complain to me. Little piggy, she'd say, your grandma's love has moved on. She doesn't love me anymore, she loves you now. We lived there for a year. That year, it snowed in Jianmen. I turned 1, grew a few little teeth, and my smile made my mother's heart bloom. She would often lift me high in the air, and we would spin together among the roses. My grandmother still loved to sit by the window, flipping through a novel so thick she could barely hold it, sometimes gazing blankly at the rose bushes outside. The daily routine for mother and daughter was bickering. My grandmother would scold her daughter for having no concept of money. My mother would call my grandmother an old fossil. When I played in the living room, my grandmother would read stories to me, and in the end, she would say, the pigeon flew away. It decided to fly to a distant land, to find a place of its own. Whenever my mother saw this, she would sit with me, listening intently to my grandmother's stories. Winter was a difficult season for my grandmother. She always bundled up in thick layers. At first, it was just an occasional cough. My mother urged her to take medicine, but she would always dismiss it as an old ailment that medicine couldn't help. Then, a high fever set in that wouldn't break. My mother cared for her day and night. Soon after, my grandmother was hospitalized. A thick layer of snow covered the flower beds outside the window. While my grandmother slept, my mother would stare out at the sweet osmanthus tree. The cold snow would sometimes slide from the leaves, forming a small mound below. I had never seen such a look on my mother's face, as pale and desolate as the snow outside. In the end, my grandmother was laid to rest in a small box. At the same time, an anonymous message arrived on my mother's phone. It was from an unknown number with no signature. The message was only 1 line, but it seared into her eyes like a red-hot iron. The child's congenital heart disease has a high probability of being hereditary. The source is the patermal family. The kin family has a history of it. The air froze. I lay beside her in a simple baby carriage, wrapped in a small blanket, yet I could clearly feel her body go rigid. The knuckles of the hand clutching the phone turned white, trembling slightly. That single line of text burned in her pupils, incinerating the last shred of hope, the last pillar of support she had left after my grandmother's passing. Grandma was gone. The only person in the world willing to take us in, who masked her love and worry with harsh words, was gone. Now, this anonymous message was a poisoned dagger, expertly piercing the barely healed wound of my existence. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a cruel twist of fate. It was Kinchi. It was the man who had once sworn to love only her, and then had crushed that vow with his own hands. The curse in his blood was planted in my body, becoming a sword hanging over my head, ready to fall at any moment and steal what little time I had. My mother gasped, the cold, damp Xianmen air choking her into a violent coughing fit. Tears streamed down her face, but this time she made no sound. She bit her lower lip so hard she tasted blood. She fiercely wiped away the tears. The expensive cashmere scarf, the one thing she couldn't bear to part with, was ripped from her neck. The pure white wool was now smudged with dust and stained with tears. She looked at it, no longer with fondness, but with a coldness that bordered on destructive. She crumpled it into a ball and shoved it into the very bottom of the old cloth bag she had brought to carry my grandmother's belongings. She picked me up, her movements gentle yet filled with a decisive force. My small face brushed against her cold cheek. She lowered her head, her forehead touching mine, her voice as hoarse as sandpaper. Little piggy, don't be afraid. Grandma was tired, so she went to rest. From now on, it's just Mom. She paused, her breath heavy. And for the debt that bastard owes us, Mom will collect it for you, piece by piece, with interest. Not for forgiveness, but so that you can live. The hospital corridor was cold and empty. At the billing window, my mother stared at the astronomical figure on the bill, my grandmother's final treatment and funeral costs, plus the medical debt she had already incurred for my illness. All her money, including the meager savings my grandmother had left, was a drop in the ocean. The head nurse handed her another payment notice, her eyes filled with a complicated mix of pity and duty. Miss Wen, my condolences. About the bill she trailed off, clearly aware of our dire situation. My mother took the paper, her fingertips ice cold. She said nothing, but her arms tightened around me. Leaving the hospital, we returned to the little courtyard that now smelled of cold roses. The yard had lost its mistress, even the lazy white cat seemed listless, its spirit gone. My mother stood there for a moment, then turned, her face set with a steely resolve I had never seen before. The weeping heiress was gone. In her place stood a mother, ready for war. I was huddled beneath the cold stone table. Inside, the rattan chair where Grandma always sat was empty. The thick novel still lay open on the small table by the window, its pages rustling in the wind. After settling me down, my mother began to pack in silence. She took out everything my grandmother had left, sorting through each item, her movements slow and deliberate. When she came across the old cloth bag, and her hand touched the soft bundle of cashmere inside, she paused. The next morning, the sun made a rare appearance in Jiangmen. It was a pale, white light, offering no warmth. My mother held me, the old cloth bag slung over her shoulder, and walked to the only decent second-hand luxury consignment shop in town. The air inside was a cloying mix of old leather and disinfectant. The owner was a shrewd-looking middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses. My mother placed the bag on the counter and unfolded the scar. Even stained and worn, the texture of the top-grade cashmere and the brand's logo were still unmistakable. The owner pushed up his glasses, examining the scarf closely. He glanced at my mother, haggard and dressed in a cheap cotton jacket, and a look of understanding mixed with barely concealed contempt flickered in his eyes. "Miss, this style is quite old," he said, "and the condition isn't great. The most I can offer is this." He held up one hand. 500 yuan. It's not even enough for a week of your medical bills. My mother didn't flinch. She simply looked at him calmly. "This is a limited edition, Hermes. It retailed for 128,000. The owner scoffed. "Miss, you said it yourself, retailed. Now, it's worth this much. Take it or leave it." He made a move to push the scarf back. A few other customers cast curious, gossiping glances their way. My mother could feel their stares like needles on her back. She remembered the mockery on the phone, the sneer on Ling Ling's face, the latter on the other end of Kincha's call. A tidal wave of humiliation and rage crashed over her, turning her eyes crimson. Just as the owner expected her to storm out in shame, as she might have in the past, my mother suddenly reached out and pressed her hand firmly on the cashmere scar. She even smiled, a smile so cold it was chilling, filled with the madness of someone with nothing left to lose. "Fine. 500 it is." Her voice was steady, almost crisp. "But I want it in cash, right now." Her eyes scanned the other people in the shop before locking back onto the owner. "And I have one more request. Please cut it up in front of everyone." The owner was stunned. "What?" I said. My mother enunciated each word with perfect clarity. "I want you to cut it into shreds right now, in front of me. Cut it into a pile of rags. And I'll walk away with the 500 yuan. She released the scarf, picked me up, and stood straight, her chin lifted slightly. For a moment, she was the imperious, unyielding Miss Wen once more. The shop fell silent. Everyone was shocked by the sudden turn of events. The owner's face flushed red, then pale. He looked at the scarf on the counter, then at the wild, defiant woman before him, and found himself trapped. If he cut it, he'd be destroying merchandise he could still sell. If he didn't, with so many people watching, he would lose face after she had called his bluff. My mother simply held me, her gaze cold and waiting. That look was sharper than any 501 price tag. Finally, under the watchful eyes of everyone in the shop, the owner, humiliated and furious, grabbed a pair of scissors. With a vicious motion, he began to cut into the once priceless scar. Snit. Snit. Fragments of pure white cashmere fluttered down like a hopeless snowstorm. My mother watched calmly until the last piece fell. She held out her hand, and took the 5 crumpled 101 bills from the owner. Without a second glance, she stuffed them into her pocket, turned, and walked out of the shop with her back straight, under the complex gazes of everyone inside. The pale sun illuminated her thin, stubborn figure. The 500 yuan in her pocket felt like a branding iron. In her arms, I reached out a small hand and gently touched her cold cheek. She looked down at me, into my clear, innocent eyes, and her voice was so low only we could hear it, laced with the desperate resolve of a final gamble. Did you see that, little piggy? Sometimes, dignity is only worth 500 yuan. But that's okay. Mom will pick it back up, and rebuild it piece by piece with their blood and their flesh. 500 yuan was a drop in the ocean, but something in my mother's eyes had changed. The confusion, sorrow, and petulant anger were gone, replaced by a refined coldness that smelled of blood. My grandmother's death, and that anonymous text were the final 2 hammer blows that shattered the last vestiges of weakness and illusion in her heart. She began to transform into a cornered she-wolf, seeking any means of survival. First, came the money. She no longer hoped for help from anyone. The Jianmen courtyard was quiet, but remote. Holding me, she used the last of my grandmother's living expenses to take a bus into the city. Her destination was clear, the back alleys of the old commercial district. It was a place teeming with cheap hotels, small eateries, and walls plastered with recruitment ads. The air was thick with the smell of cooking oil and sweat. Dressed in her plainest clothes, with no makeup and her hair tied back carelessly, my mother squeezed through the crowds, holding me. She went from one shop to another. Are you hiring dishwashers? Kitchen help? A waitress? I can try. But I have a child with me. The responses were mostly shakes of the head, impatient waves of dismissal, or refusals tinged with pity. No, we're too busy here. There's no place for you to watch a child. You're so skinny yourself, and you're carrying a sick baby. How could you possibly work? The sun beat down, soaking her back with sweat. I began to whimper in her arms, uncomfortable from the stuffy heat. She clumsily soothed me while moving on to the next shop. The money she once spent with a flick of her fingers had now become a crushing weight. Finally, in front of a dimly lit food stall with crates of beer stacked by the door, a proprietress in a grazy apron with a cigarette dangling from her lips looked her up and down. She glanced at my red, crying face and blew a smoke ring. With a kid, huh? Pitiful. Fine. 6 to midnight. Wash dishes in the back. 1 meal included. 2,200 a month. You in or out. The kid can stay on that small stool in the corner. You watch her yourself. If she falls or gets hurt, don't come crying to me. To my mother, the number 2,200 sounded like a gift from heaven. She didn't hesitate. I'll do it. I'll do it. That night, I was placed on a small, greasy plastic stool, surrounded by the deafening clamor of shouting games, the sizzle of woks, and the clatter of dishes. The thick, oily smoke made me cough. My mother tied on the apron the proprietress threw at her. It reeked of fish, rolled up her sleeves, and stood before a mountain of dirty dishes. Her hands, once only used to wear jewelry and sign checks, were plunged for the first time into grazy, cold water filled with food scraps. The slimy texture and the pungent smell of detergent made her want to gag. Cold water gushed from the huge stainless steel sink. Her back soon began to itch. Her arms felt like they were filled with lead. Several times, a slippery plate almost fell from her grasp. The proprietress came in to check, a cigarette in her mouth. Seeing me in the corner, crying incessantly from the noise and discomfort, her brow furrowed into a knot. Control your kid, she's so noisy. If her crying affects business, you can both get out. My mother quickly wiped the foam from her hands and rushed to my side, picking me up. She patted me gently, apologizing over and over. I'm sorry. She'll stop crying now, she'll be quiet now. Her anxious eyes darted around, finally landing on the freezer. Gritting her teeth, she carried me over, opened the door, and let the cold air wash over my hot little face. Perhaps it was the shock of the cold, but I miraculously stopped crying, my big, wet eyes staring curiously at the contents of the freezer. My mother breathed a sigh of relief and shot the proprietress a placating smile. See? He stopped crying now. The proprietress rolled her eyes, and said nothing more. My mother placed me back on the stool, glanced one more time at the freezer, and then hurried back to the sink to continue her battle with the endless pile of dishes. Sweat mixed with grease dripped from her forehead into the dirty water. Her arms, submerged for so long, became red and wrinkled. Late at night, the noise finally subsided. My mother was so tired she could barely stand, her back locked in a painful stoop. The proprietress shoved a grazy 20-yuan bill into her hand. Here. Your pay for tonight. I'll count it as 80. Daily pay. Be here on time tomorrow. Clutching the 80 yuan, holding a now drowsy me, my mother stumbled through the cold, deserted streets of the early morning. The streetlights stretched our shadows long behind us. She leaned down and kissed my forehead, her voice exhausted but tinged with satisfaction. Did you see that, little piggy? 80 yuan. Mom earned this by washing dishes for 4 hours. She paused, her voice growing even quieter, but firm. We're one tiny step closer to your surgery fee. Mom will keep going. By the time we got back to the courtyard, the sky was already light. She hastily cleaned us both up, collapsed onto the bed, and fell into a deep sleep. Her dreams were no longer of lavish clothes and fancy meals, or of heart-wrenching arguments, but of a giant sink, crazy plates, and the proprietress's impatient scolding. The second day, the third day. She became a machine wound tight. During the day, she cared for me at home, gave me my medicine, and did simple chores. In the evening, she appeared on time in the back kitchen of the food stall, disappearing into a world of grease and noise. Her dishwashing speed increased. The skin on her hands, soaked in detergent, turned white and cracked, stinging with pain every time it touched water. She learned to rush over to soothe me during her short breaks. She learned to endure the proprietress's harsh words and the subtle mockery of the other kitchen staff. She silently bore it all, like a piece of iron being thrown into a blazing fire and hammered repeatedly. Sometimes, on the way home late at night, she would look up at the cold Jiangnan moon. The moonlight would spill into her tired but exceptionally clear eyes. The old arrogance and confusion were gone, replaced by an almost cruel clarity, and a flame that was suppressed to its absolute limit. She began to take note of everything in the small town. She memorized the address of the only local newspaper office as she passed by. She noted the location of a law firm that was rumored to take on private cases, and had a well-connected owner. She even started talking to old Mr. Zhang next door, who was always drunk but was said to have worked as a cleaner in a subsidiary of the Qin Corporation in his youth. She would hold me and make casual conversation, subtly inquiring about old news concerning the Qin family and Qin Shi's father. Days crawled by in a haze of agony and calculation. My body remained weak, my heart conditioned a ticking time bomb. But my mother was like a tightly drawn bowstring, poised to snap at any moment, yet accumulating a terrifying strength. One evening, the food stall was exceptionally busy. My mother was running off her feet. Dirty dishes piled up like mountains in the sink, and the proprietress's shrill voice urged her on relentlessly. The oily smoke made me cough again, my small face turning red. My mother's heart pounded with anxiety, and her movements grew faster. A greasy plate slipped through her fingers. Crash, it shattered on the floor. The piercing sound silenced the entire kitchen for a moment. The proprietress, like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, stormed in. Seeing the shards on the floor, she erupted. Are you trying to kill me? Are you blind? Do you know how much one of these plates costs? I am docking your pay, 100 from this month's salary. I'm sorry, it was an accident. My child isn't feeling well. My mother explained frantically, trying to go to me. The child, it's always the child. Why would you even come out to work with a little sickling? Your bad luck, the proprietress screamed, pointing a finger at her nose. The cost of this bowl is coming out of your salary. Now clean up the mess. You break one more and you can get out. Take your little sickling and get out. The cruel words were like icy daggers stabbing into my mother's heart. She looked at the proprietress's face, twisted with rage, then at me in the corner, curled into a ball from coughing. A vicious fire shot through her, making her tremble. She clenched her fists, her nails digging deep into the soft flesh of her palms. Just then, the kitchen curtain was violently thrown aside. A man in a meticulously tailored suit, who clashed jarringly with the grazy environment, burst in, his expression frantic. His eyes, sharp as lightning, swept across the chaotic kitchen, finally landing with precision on me, coughing my heart out on the small stool in the corner. When he saw the woman holding me, the woman in the grazy apron, disheveled and gaunt, he froze, as if struck by lightning. That face, carved into his very bones, once so familiar, now seemed a world away. When one. Hinshi's pupils contracted violently. His heart felt as if it had been seized by an invisible hand, and a suffocating pain spread through his entire body. He looked at the child huddled in the corner, whose face was turning blue, and then at Wen Wan's current state, the stained apron, the cracked and swollen hands, the bloodshot eyes burning with a furious fire. Hinshi's voice was hoarse, trembling with disbelief. He could hardly recognize her. Was this the same flamboyant, arrogant, and pampered Miss Wen, who had insisted that every strand of her hair be perfect? The proprietress was startled by the sudden intrusion of this man with his commanding presence, but she quickly put her hands on her hips. Hey, who are you? This is the kitchen. No entry for idlers. Kinji completely ignored her. All his attention was on the child and Wen. He lunged towards the corner, instinctively reaching for the child. What's wrong with him? Don't touch him. Like a mother beast whose territory had been invaded, my mother fiercely shielded me behind her. She looked up, her burning eyes locked on Kinji. The old entanglement of love and hate was gone from her gaze, replaced only by a cold, venomous hatred, and a desperation that bordered on madness. Her voice was raspy, each word dripping with bone, meaning and sarcasm. President Kin, what a grand entrance. Are you here with your new love to experience life? Or did you come to laugh at our misery? The air seemed to freeze. The noise of the kitchen, the proprietress's yelling, it all faded away. All that remained was the sound of a child's suppressed coughing in the corner and the silent confrontation between two people who had once loved each other to death and now stood separated by a sea of blood and hatred. Kinji's outstretched hand froze mid-air. He looked at the palpable hatred in Wenwan's eyes, then at the child behind her who looked so much like he did as a boy, yet was now so frail and ill. Combined with that earth-shattering anonymous message, a tsunami of regret instantly engulfed him. He finally understood that he had lost far more than he had ever imagined. He opened his mouth, but his throat felt like it was clogged with sandpaper, and no sound came out. For the first time, the decisive and formidable President Kin felt a bone-killing panic and helplessness. The proprietress, intimidated by the strange atmosphere and the cold aura emanating from Kinji, subconsciously took a step back, not daring to speak. Get out of my way. My mother no longer looked at Kinji. She snatched me up, it was limp from coughing, and shoved past him, heading straight for the exit, leaving behind nothing but a cold and resolute back. Kinji stood frozen like a statue. In that brief moment of contact, he had clearly felt the unnatural heat of the child's body and the rapid, weak thumping of his heart. Wenwan's venomous glare and her words, laugh at our misery, seared his heart like a branding iron. He spun around and roared at his still, shocked assistant, his voice hoarse and out of control. Investigate, now, immediately. I want to know everything that has happened to them these past few years, and that child is illness. Get me the best pediatric cardiologist. Now, the assistant, having never seen his boss so unhinged, quickly complied, pulling out his phone. Kinji's gaze was fixed on the direction Wenwan had disappeared, his fists clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his palms, drawing blood. For the first time, he realized with terrifying clarity that the price for his mistakes would be far greater than he could have ever imagined. And that child, his son, his fragile appearance intertwined with the hatred in Wenwan's eyes, formed the sharpest of knives, slowly flaying his heart. He had to do something. Right now. Not to win her back, but to atone. My mother ran out of that alley filled with smoke and humiliation, the night wind hitting her so hard it made her cough. She staggered, her heart hammering in her chest, not from running, but from rage and the sharp, agonizing pain of a wound being torn open again. Kinji. How could he be here? Was it a coincidence? Or was it related to the anonymous message? She didn't dare to think. She just wanted to run, to get as far away from that man as possible. In her arms, my coughing subsided, but my face remained flushed and hot, my breathing rapid and labored. Little piggy, don't be afraid. Mom's here. Mom's taking you to the hospital, she said, her voice trembling on the verge of tears, but she forced herself to stay calm. She held me and ran through the empty, late-night streets, heading towards the town's small clinic from memory. The clinic was poorly equipped. The young woman on duty was startled by my blue-tinged face and rapid breathing and immediately arranged for oxygen and an examination. The pungent smell of disinfectant filled the small room. The child's condition is very bad, the young doctor said anxiously. A severe respiratory infection has triggered heart failure. We can't handle this here. He needs to be transferred to the city hospital immediately. Transferred to the city. That meant an exorbitant ambulance fee and even higher medical costs. My mother felt the world go dark, and she almost collapsed. She clutched the last few dozen yuan in her pocket, her knuckles white. Just as she was suffocating in despair, the glass door of the clinic was thrust open. Kinji's tall figure appeared in the doorway, bringing with him a cold aura of absolute authority. His assistant followed, speaking in low tones with the clinic director. Seeing him, my mother bristled like a cornered cat. Kinji, get out. I don't want to see you. Get out, she screamed, spreading her arms to block the hospital bed like a mother animal protecting her cub, her eyes ferocious as if she were about to lunge and tear him apart. Kinji ignored her fury. His gaze went past her, locking onto the small figure on the bed, an oxygen tube taped to his face. The child's fragility stabbed at his eyes. He took a deep breath, suppressing the turmoil inside him. His voice was low and hard, filled with the unquestionable tone of command he used in the boardroom. Wenwan, this is not the time for tantrums. The child needs to be transferred to the city's Tongran hospital immediately. I've already arranged for the ambulance and specialists. Money is not an issue. I don't need your money. My mother shrieked, her voice cracking with emotion. I can take care of my own child. I don't need your fake charity. Get out. You'll take care of him. Ow. Kinshi's voice suddenly rose, his suppressed anger and anxiety finally exploding. He strode to the bedside, pointed at my blue face and labored breathing, and demanded, his eyes bloodshot, "By washing dishes in a place like that? With the few dozen you won in your pocket? Or with your so-called dignity and stubbornness? Look at him, Wen. Look at our son. He's not going to make it. How long are you going to be so willful? Our son." Those two words struck my mother like a sledgehammer and exploded like thunder in the small clinic. The young doctor and nurse stared in disbelief at the feuding couple. My mother was choked by his words. Looking at my pained expression, her heart felt like it was being ripped to shreds. Of course she knew the situation was critical. But how could she accept Kinshi's charity? It was her deepest, most painful shame. "It's because of you." My mother's voice was a blood-soaked accusation, the tears finally breaking free. "It was you. You're the one who gave him this disease. You're the one who ruined everything." "Yes. It was me," Kinshi admitted without hesitation, his own voice now hoarse with pain. "I know. I'm a bastard. I know what I owe you and our son. But right now, all I want is to save my son. Wen, I'm begging you. Let's save the child first. We can deal with everything else later. Hate me, kill me, do whatever you want. But please, let's save the child first." His last words, "save the child first," were the key that unlocked all of my mother's forced defenses. What was more important than my life? She could hate Kinshi for the rest of her life, she could never forgive him, but she couldn't gamble with her child's life. She looked into his eyes and saw an unmistakable anxiety and pain that wasn't an act. At least in this moment, he genuinely cared about this child's life. My mother's body trembled violently. She bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. Finally, as if all her strength had been drained, she gave a slow, incredibly difficult nod. The tension in Kinshi's body eased instantly. He barked at his assistant, "Get the ambulance here now. Prepare for transfer." A professional ambulance soon arrived with sirens wailing. The paramedics swiftly moved me onto a stretcher. My mother tried to follow, but Kinshi grabbed her arm. She turned, shocked and angry. "What are you doing?" Kinshi looked at her, his expression complicated. "You're coming too. The specialists in the city will need you to provide the child's detailed medical history." His tone left no room for argument. My mother wrenched her arm free. "I'll get there myself," she said coldly. She hurried after the ambulance, climbed in, and tightly held my hand, not sparing Kinshi another glance. Kinshi watched the ambulance doors close, his expression dark and unrebel. He didn't force his way on. Instead, he turned to his assistant. "You follow the ambulance. I'll take the next car. Also, have the lawyers start investigating immediately. The truth behind the Wen family's bankruptcy, the source of that anonymous message, and every single person who was pulling strings in the background. I want them all found. Don't let a single one get away." A glint of cold ruthlessness flashed in his eyes. Outside the EQ at Tongren Hospital in the city, my mother sat alone on a cold plastic chair, wearing an ill-fitting hospital gown. She looked like a bowstring pulled taut, ready to snap at any moment. She was rigid, fragile. Through the thick glass, she could see the bustling medical staff and the tiny figure on the bed, entangled in a web of tubes. Time ticked by, each second an eternity of torment. The sharp click of high heels on the linoleum floor grew closer, a sound of deliberate elegance and arrogance. A woman in a chic suit with flawless makeup appeared in the hallway, walking straight towards my mother. It was Ling. Her face wore a mask of faint concern, but her eyes were filled with gloating curiosity. "Oh, Wan, is it really you? I heard someone say they saw you in the emergency room, but I couldn't believe it. How did you end up like this? Is the child okay?" Her gaze swept over my mother's hospital gown and then glanced towards the ICU, her tone sickeningly solicitous. My mother didn't look up, didn't even raise an eyelid. Lingling's presence was like a buzzing fly, grating on her already frayed nerves. She had no energy to deal with this hypocritical performance. Seeing that she was being ignored, Lingling sat down in the adjacent chair and continued in the tone of a confidant. "You know, if you had just listened to my advice back then, not been so willful, and made things work with President Qin, you wouldn't be in this state. It must be so hard, with a sick child." She sighed dramatically. "But don't worry too much. President Qin is a sentimental man. He'll surely shut up." My mother finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it was as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. Lingling was taken aback, the fake smile faltering on her face. Wan, I'm just trying to help me." My mother slowly lifted her head. Her eyes, bloodshot from exhaustion and worry, were now as sharp as daggers, pinning Lingling to the spot. Her voice was laced with a chilling, mocking frost. "Was it helping me when you told me to bark like a dog over the phone? Or was it helping me when, after my family went bankrupt, you were the first to kick me when I was down, spreading rumors everywhere that the great Miss Wen had become a street rat. Lingling's face changed instantly, her eyes darting nervously. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. My mother cut her off, her voice terrifyingly calm. Lingling, drop the act. I was a fool to ever consider you a friend. I may be down now, but I'm not out. Get lost. Don't be an eyesore. Her gaze flickered over Lingling's designer suit and brand name bag, a cold smirk touching her lips. Otherwise, I wouldn't mind giving you a taste of what it's like to fall from the clouds into the mud. You know. When I snap, I'm capable of anything. The ferocity and determination in her eyes made Lingling's heart lurch. She remembered the arrogant, reckless Wen of the past. Even in her current state, that untamed spirit was still there. Lingling instinctively stood up, forcing a haughty sniff. Fine. Ungrateful. You deserve to be miserable. With that, she turned and hurried away on her high heels, almost fleeing. Silence returned to the hallway. My mother lowered her head again, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling slightly. It wasn't fear or sadness, but a roiling wave of anger and disgust from being so thoroughly betrayed and used. Lingling's appearance had ripped open a bloody wound, reminding her of her past foolishness, and fanning the flames of revenge in her heart. Just then, the IQ door opened. A white-haired specialist in a lab coat emerged, his expression grave. My mother shot to her feet, her eyes wide with anxiety. The specialist looked at her, then at Kinchi, who had just strode up. The child's condition has stabilized for now, the doctor began. The acute heart failure is under control, but he's still in critical condition. His congenital heart defect is complex, with severe pulmonary artery dysplasia and severe regurgitation. Medication and conservative treatment can only delay the inevitable. The only solution is a radical corrective surgery, as soon as possible. Surgery. My mother's heart leaped into her throat. What are the chances of success? How much will it cost? The surgery itself is high risk, but if successful, it could significantly improve his quality of life, perhaps even allowing him to live a near normal life. As for the cost, the specialist named a figure that made the world go black for my mother. And that's just the base cost for the surgery and initial treatment. The subsequent rehabilitation, medication, and potential complications will add to that. The doctor's verdict was like a bucket of ice water, snapping my mother out of her brief rage. The astronomical surgical fee was an insurmountable mountain standing between her and her child's survival. She instinctively looked at Kinchi. Without a moment's hesitation, Kinchi spoke to the doctor, his voice firm and decisive. Money is not an issue. Use the best plan, the best medicine, the best team. Schedule the surgery immediately, as soon as possible. I will cover all expenses. His gaze was locked on the IQ door, his focus and resolve something my mother had never seen before. The specialist nodded. All right. We'll formulate a detailed surgical plan as soon as possible. But we'll need a period of careful conditioning before the surgery to strengthen the child's constitution and reduce the risks. This period of care and medication is just as crucial. I told you, Kinchi cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. Money is not an issue. Whatever you need, contact my assistant directly. My mother stood there, a silent statue. Kinchi's generosity was a double-edged sword. It brought hope for her child's survival, but it was also the sharpest of needles, repeatedly piercing her sensitive pride and her blood-soaked past. She needed this money. For her little piggy, she had to accept this humiliating charity. But her acceptance would not be a silent surrender. She did not thank him. She did not even look at him. She simply bowed deeply to the specialist, her voice hoarse but clear. Doctor, I'm entrusting him to you. I will cooperate fully. Kinchi looked at her straight, thorny back, his expression complex. He knew she hated him to the bone. He arranged for my mother and me to be transferred to a private VIP suite, complete with 24-hour professional nursing care. But he kept his distance. He worked from the sofa in the outer room of the suite, dealing with a mountain of documents, his phone calls one after another, his voice cold and commanding with his usual iron-fisted business demeanor. He needed to handle these matters quickly to focus his full attention on the investigation and the impending reckoning. His assistant was incredibly efficient. A few days later, a thick investigation report was placed before Kinchi. He spent the night reading it, his face growing darker and darker, like a storm cloud about to burst. The truth behind the Wen family's bankruptcy was shocking. It wasn't due to mismanagement, but a deliberate, calculated takedown. Key figures within Kin Corporation had colluded with external capitalists, using inside information and a regulatory loophole created by his divorce from Wen to launch a precision strike. The anonymous text message was also traced back to the same interest group, their goal being to completely sever the ties between Wen and Kinchi, preferably by driving Wen to a breakdown or making her disappear with the child, eliminating any future complications. And Lingling, the woman Wen had once considered her only true friend, had played a particularly despicable role. She was not only a mole planted by the interest group to feed them information about Wenwan's movements and weaknesses, but after the bankruptcy, she had been the one to spread vicious rumors, lead the charge in kicking Wenwan when she was down, and even tried to curry favor with her patrons by humiliating Wenwan. Her concern was a lie. Her true purpose was surveillance and sabotage. Kinchi let out a cold, blood-tinged laugh. He thought of Wenwan's grease-stained hands as she washed dishes in that back kitchen, of the despair in her eyes when her child was sick, of the undisguised hatred she directed at him. All of this, it turned out, was thanks to the teen he had trusted, and this venomous woman. He picked up the phone, and dialed the head of his legal department, his voice terrifyingly calm. Activate Plan A. Inform all parties involved, including but not limited to Director Jung, Manager Lee, and that woman, Ling. I'm giving them 24 hours to come to the headquarters and confess everything, and to sign the relevant compensation agreements. Otherwise, he paused, each word landing like an icicle, I will show them what true bankruptcy is. I will show them what it means to lose everything and rot in jail. Meanwhile, in the VIP suite, my mother had dismissed the nurse, insisting on taking care of me herself. She clumsily but diligently learned the feeding techniques, burping methods, and how to monitor my breathing and complexion. She would sit by my bedside, hold my little hand, and whisper stories of the roses in my grandmother's courtyard and of the fat white cat. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were like tempered steel. The news that Ling had been invited to the corporation's headquarters by Kinchi's people soon reached my mother. She just gave a cold smile and continued feeding me. She knew Kinchi had made his move, but this was just the beginning. Her revenge would not be carried out by another's hand. She needed power, her own power to stand back up. A few days later, an unexpected visitor appeared at the door. It was Wenwan's former stepmother, Ju Ping, the woman who had fled the country with her father and their money the moment the Wen family went bankrupt. She was dressed in an understated but high-quality suit, her well-maintained face etched with a mix of awkwardness and urgency. Wenwan, Ju Ping began, forcing a smile as she looked at the gaunt but sharp-eyed Wenwan and the frail child on the bed. Your father and I heard the child was sick, so we came back to see you. My mother put down the water cup, not even bothering to look up. Her voice was flat, but carried a bone-deep chill. See us? To see if we're dead yet? Or did you see that Kinchi has stepped in, and now you think there's something to gain by crawling back? Ju Ping's smile froze. Wenwan, how can you say that? We're family, after all. Family. My mother finally looked up, the cold mockery in her eyes making Ju Ping instinctively take a step back. When the Wen family went bankrupt, you two took the last of the emergency funds and ran faster than rabbits. You threw us out like trash to fend for ourselves. You didn't talk about family then. Now that you see Kinchi is taking care of us, you remember we're family. Ju Ping, your hypocrisy is disgusting. She stood up and advanced on Ju Ping. Though then, her presence was menacing. Listen to me and go back and tell Wen Ji-won, she said, naming her father. As far as I'm concerned, you, him, and I. We were done the moment you ran away with the money. My child has nothing to do with the Wen family. Now get out. And don't let me see you again. Otherwise, I wouldn't mind letting Kinchi know how you two cooked the books and siphoned off Wen family assets right under his nose. What do you think? Do you think he'd be more forgiving now, or would he hate you even more for what you did? The threat in her words, and the ferocity in her eyes terrified Ju Ping into a pale silence. She knew Kinchi's methods all too well. If he found out about their past dealings, she couldn't bear to think about it. Without another word, she turned and practically fled. Watching Ju Ping's hasty retreat, my mother's chest heaved. Driving away these leeches was just the first step. She needed money, real power of her own. Not just to pay for the surgery, but to be able to stand on equal ground with Kinchi, to hold her own fate in her hands. She picked up her phone, and dialed a number she had been hesitating to call, the well-connected lawyer in the small town. Mr. Wang. This is Wenwan. I'd like to talk to you about the ownership of the Jianan courtyard my mother left me, and how to use it to secure some start-up capital. Mr. Wan was a shrewd middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses, and the worldly wise, cautious eyes of a small-town lawyer. After listening to my mother's brief explanation, he pushed up his glasses and said thoughtfully, Miss Wen, that courtyard is in a beautiful, quiet location, but it's not large, and it's rather remote. At the current market price, whether you mortgage it or sell it outright, the funds you'd get would likely be far from what you need. The implication was clear, it would be a drop in the ocean compared to the child's astronomical medical bills and her own ambitions. My mother was not surprised. I know, she said calmly. I don't want to sell it off. Her eyes grew sharp with a do-or-die determination. I heard that the Jianan municipal government has a cultural tourism support project called Ancient Charm, New Look. They're looking for unique Jianan courtyards to renovate and upgrade into a cluster of boutique guesthouses. Selected projects can get low-interest loans, policy subsidies, and promotional support. Mr. Wan looked at her with a hint of surprise. Miss Wen, you're very well informed. That project does exist, but the competition is fierce. The evaluation criteria are very strict. They don't just look at the physical condition of the courtyard, but also the cultural depth of the renovation plan, its commercial viability, and the qualifications of the operating team. With all due respect. He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. A single mother with a seriously ill child and no business experience stood no chance. Qualifications can be found, my mother interrupted, her tone firm. I just need you to confirm 2 things for me, Mr. Wine. First, is the title to the courtyard my mother left me clear? Can it be used as the main entity for the project application? Second, I need the most detailed application guidelines and evaluation criteria for the support project. Looking at this woman with her unwavering gaze, and an aura that completely contradicted her downtrodden appearance, Mr. Wang set aside his last bit of condescension. The title is clear. Your mother had it notarized before she passed away, it belongs entirely to you. I can get you the guidelines and criteria. But Miss Wen, this will not be easy. I know, my mother said, standing up and looking out the window at the bustling city below. Her voice was low, but carried the fierce intensity of someone willing to risk it all. Could it be harder than watching my child wait to die? Harder than being trampled into the mud and humiliated? Mr. Wine, please help me. When this is all over, you will be compensated handsomely. Moved by her determination, Mr. Wine nodded. All right. I'll get the materials for you as soon as possible. Also, if you need help finding a qualified operating team or design team, I might be able to make some introductions. But the fees? I'll find a way, my mother said, her voice like steel. In the days that followed, the hospital room became my mother's temporary war room. When I slept, she would be hunched over the small table by my bed, studying project application materials, business plan templates, and market research reports all night long. The nurses who tried to help were politely but firmly turned away. If she didn't understand something, she would look it up, or call the contacts Mr. Wang had introduced. She revised her plan over and over. Her already gaunt face grew paler from lack of sleep, but her eyes were startlingly bright, burning with the fire of revenge and survival. Kinchi saw all of this. He did not interfere. He only instructed his assistant to provide the utmost convenience, ensuring that my mother and I receive the best care. He watched her silently, watched how she started from scratch, clumsily but with incredible persistence, devouring those business documents. He watched how she humbled herself, yet with clear objectives, contacted potential partners. Her indomitable spirit and reckless determination were both foreign and vaguely heart-wrenching to him. He intensified the speed and scope of his investigation. Under immense pressure and faced with the irrefutable evidence Kinchi had gathered, including phone recordings of her conversations with her patrons and financial records, Lingling's psychological defenses completely collapsed. To save herself, she tearfully confessed everything, how she was bribed to spy on Wen Wan, how she spread rumors, and even how she had secretly pushed things along during the Wen family's bankruptcy. She signed a confession and a massive compensation agreement that was tantamount to indentured servitude. Kinchi's people sent her to a remote location where she would spend the rest of her life laboring to repay her debt, stripped of her freedom and dignity. The Kin Corporation executives and external capitalists who had participated in the takedown of the Wen family were either sent to prison or forced into bankruptcy by Kinchi's powerful legal team and ruthless tactics, completely removed from the inner circle. With an iron fist, Kinchi declared to the world that anyone who touched what was his would pay 100-fold. This purge sent shockwaves through the corporation and solidified his authority. When Kinchi made the results of his investigation public in a very forceful manner, and announced that he was transferring a portion of his personal assets to establish a trust fund specifically to cover all of my medical expenses and ensure my mother's basic living standards, public opinion exploded. The once balked villainous Wen Wan was instantly transformed into a strong mother, wronged by a cheating husband, framed by treacherous people, and raising a sick child on her own. She gained immense sympathy and attention. My mother learned of this from the nurse's gossip and an excited phone call from Mr. Wang. Miss Wen, good news. President Qin has made his move. The people who wronged you have all been dealt with. Lingling is finished. And he set up a trust fund. The child's medical expenses are covered. Mr. Wang's voice was jubilant. Holding the phone, my mother stood by the hospital window, looking at the patient strolling in the garden below. The sun was bright, but her heart was a block of ice. Lingling's fate, the bankruptcy of her enemies, Kinchi's compensation, the news was like pebbles tossed into a deep well, creating only a brief ripple before sinking into silence. She was not overwhelmed with the joy of vengeance. Lingling and the others were dealt with by Kinchi. The money was a handout from Kinchi. What kind of revenge was that? She, Wen Wan, was still the same pitiful creature, dependent on Kinchi's charity to survive. No. This was not the outcome she wanted. She hung up on Mr. Wang, turned back to the bed, and looked at my sleeping form, her eyes gentle but firm. She leaned down and whispered in my ear, more like a vow to herself, "Don't be afraid, little pity. Soon, Mom will be able to build a world for you with her own 2 hands." Mom is going to take back not just the money, but her dignity. Everything that was lost, she will win back, piece by piece, with her own hands. The news of Kinchi's purge of the traitors, and the establishment of the trust fund sent huge ripples through society. The mockery and contempt for Wen-1 were quickly replaced by an overwhelming wave of sympathy, admiration, and curiosity. Her former identity as the heiress of the Wen family, and the ex-wife of the president of Kin Corporation, combined with her dramatic downfall and rise, made her a natural media sensation. The media, with its keen sense of smell, began to move. At first it was just tabloids trying to dig up dirt on the wealthy, but they were quickly shut down by Kinchi's powerful team. However, a well-researched, in-depth article by a senior financial journalist with a fresh perspective began to circulate. The article didn't dwell on the emotional drama, but focused on Wen-1 herself, a young mother who had lost everything, struggling to survive in a desperate situation, transforming from a dishwasher to a determined entrepreneur in the cultural tourism industry. The journalist cleverly mentioned the rose-covered Jianmen courtyard and the government support project she was actively applying for, expressing admiration for the fallen heiress's resilience. This article was a spark that instantly ignited public interest in Wen-1. Rose courtyard, resilient mother, entrepreneurial comeback. These keywords quickly became trending topics. People were curious. Could this former pampered princess really carve out a path for herself in the business world? Could her project succeed? The immense attention brought unexpected free publicity to her yet to be launched project. Mr. Wen called, ecstatic. Miss Wen, have you seen? The whole city is talking about your project. This is huge for our application. I've heard from the review committee that because of the unique nature of your project, and the public interest, they're likely to consider it a key support case. We have to seize this opportunity. My mother looked at the news about herself on her phone screen, her expression complex. She had never expected to gain attention this way. She hated being under the spotlight, scrutinized by the public. But for the project, for her child, she had to wield this double-edged sword. Mr. Wang, please arrange a meeting for me with President Chen of Kinchi Design and the head of the Yunke Guesthouse operations team. My mother's voice was exceptionally calm. The meeting will be at the courtyard. Tell them they have one chance to impress me. Their proposal must be compelling, and their price must be reasonable. She no longer hesitated, no longer cowered. She would prove with her actions that she, Wen-1, was not a parasitic vine that could only cling to a man. At the Jianmen courtyard, the roses had withered, but the lush greenery made the place seem even more serene. My mother had changed into a simple yet elegant cream-colored suit. The dramatic transformation had begun. She wore a simple lion suit, her long hair loosely tied back, revealing a slender but sharply defined jawline. Holding me, she sat in the same rattan chair my grandmother had always favored and received her visitors. President Chen of Kinchi Design and his team presented their renovation plan. The core concept was healing and rebirth, which would fully preserve the courtyard's original Jianmen charm and its signature rose elements while integrating modern, comfortable design. The goal was to create a tranquil, vibrant sanctuary for the soul. The proposal resonated perfectly with my mother's state of mind and the courtyard's inherent character. The operations team from Yunke Guesthouse then showcased their mature online promotion system and butler service model, complete with detailed data and a meticulous plan. My mother listened quietly throughout, occasionally interjecting with a sharp question that cut to the heart of costs and operations. She was no longer the heiress who only knew how to spend money. The grease of the back kitchen and the hospital's payment notices had taught her the profound value of every single cent. The quiet, sharp, and unquestionable sense of control she exuded left the seasoned professionals in the room secretly impressed. In the end, she chose Kinchi's design and decided to use Yunke for initial operational consulting, but she insisted on keeping the core management firmly in her own hands. Leveraging the immense public attention and the halo of her resilient mother persona as bargaining chips, she managed to negotiate the partnership price down to a very reasonable level, even securing terms for installment payments. It's a pleasure to work with you, President Wen. President Chen and the head of Yunke's team extended their hands, genuinely impressed. The title President Wen marked the complete transformation of Wen-1's identity. The pleasure is all mine, my mother replied, shaking their hands with a calm and confident grace. The project launched with a flurry of activity. My mother threw herself into it, personally overseeing every detail of the renovation, learning management skills, and coordinating with the teams. She became incredibly busy, yet she glowed with a new vitality. Kinchi's assistant quietly provided a great deal of support in terms of resources and connections. My mother knew this and did not refuse the help, but she never initiated contact with Kinchi. A deep chasm named the past lay between them. My surgery date was finally set for the beginning of the next month. It was a high-risk operation, but one that could rewrite my destiny if successful. The week before the surgery, my mother canceled all her work and stayed at the hospital around the clock. She grew unusually silent, often just holding my hand for hours, her eyes filled with an unconcealable fear and a desperate resolve. Kinchi also cleared his schedule, working from the outer room of the hospital's suite, his gaze constantly, involuntarily drawn to the closed door of the inner room. The night before the surgery, I was fussy due to the preparations. My mother held me, pacing gently around the room. Kenji stood outside the door, listening to the faint sounds of a child's cries and Wenwan's low, gentle murmurs of comfort. His heart felt like it was being twisted by a knife. He raised his hand to knock, but ultimately let it fall. He took out his phone. On the lock screen was the summary of the final investigation report his assistant had just sent. His eyes instantly turned glacial. The report revealed that the biggest force behind the Wen family's bankruptcy was, shockingly, his own father, Qin Zhenfeng. Displeased with Wen Wan's willfulness and how she controlled his son, and coveting some of the Wen family's core assets, Qin Zhenfeng had secretly allowed, and even encouraged, the takedown. The anonymous text message had also been his doing, a final, vicious move to ensure Wen Wan would never be a part of Qinji's life again. The biggest wolf had been right beside him all along. The knuckles of the hand holding the phone turned white, cracking from the force of his grip. A cold, world-destroying rage swept over him. His father had not only destroyed him and Wen Wan, nearly destroyed their son, but had also shattered the last shred of illusion he had about family. He dialed his assistant's number, his voice like a chilling wind from hell, laced with a self-destructive madness. Prepare the jet. I'm flying to the US tomorrow. Inform the board of directors. Immediately freeze all of Qin Zhenfeng's and his affiliates' authority and assets within the group. Initiate the liquidation plan, highest level. I want him to have nothing left. Hanging up, Qinji leaned against the cold wall, taking a deep breath. Tomorrow was the day his son's life hung in the balance, and tonight, he had to personally push his own father into the abyss. But he had no choice. To atone, to give his child and Wen Wan a future completely cleansed of the past, he had to do this. This was what he owed them. Inside the room, my mother finally lulled me to sleep. She gently placed me back on the bed, tucking me in. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating my pale little face. She leaned down and pressed a cherished kiss on my forehead, a kiss filled with all her prayers. Don't be afraid, little piggy. Mom's here. Always. Tomorrow, we'll both be okay. Her voice was as soft as a feather, but tears slid silently down her cheeks, landing on my pillow. Tomorrow. Hell or rebirth. She didn't know. She only knew that this time, no matter the outcome, she would fight alongside her child like a true warrior, to the very end. The morning sun on the day of the surgery was pale and cold. Dressed in a tiny hospital gown, I was wheeled into the pre-op area. My mother held my hand tightly until she was stopped by a nurse at the door. The heavy metal doors closed slowly in front of her, sealing away the cold instruments and shadowless lamps within. Miss Wen, please rest assured. We will do our absolute best, the lead surgeon said to her before he went in. My mother nodded stiffly, her throat so tight she couldn't speak. She stared at the door, the world around her falling silent, leaving only the deafening thunder of her own heartbeat. She slid down the cold wall, burying her face in her knees. In the face of life and death, all her strength and pretense crumbled. She was like a withered leaf in the wind, so fragile she could shatter at any moment. She didn't know how much time had passed before a suit jacket, carrying the faint scent of tobacco and a cold, sharp aura, was gently draped over her trembling shoulders. It was Qinji. He didn't speak, just sat down silently beside her. His large frame was somehow both oppressive and, in that moment, a heavy, solid anchor for my mother's collapsing world. He had just returned from the US, weary from travel and a sleepless night. His eyes were bloodshot, his face even paler than Wen Wan's. The act of personally destroying his father had been a form of mental torture. Time crawled by in a dead, agonizing silence. My mother didn't push the jacket away. She didn't look at him. A sea of blood and hatred separated them, but here, outside the door that held their child's fate, they were just two desperate parents, humbled by fear, praying for a miracle. The red light above the door glowed ominously. My mother's body was stiff and cold, her nails digging into her palms. Qinji's hands, resting on his knees, were clenched into tight fists. After what felt like an eternity, the red light above the operating room door finally went out. The door opened and the lead surgeon emerged, followed by his exhausted but bright-eyed assistants. My mother's head shot up, her body spasming from the tension. She stared at the surgeon's face, trying to read the answer in his expression, too terrified to even ask. Qinji was on his feet in an instant, his body as taut as a drawn bow. The surgeon removed his mask, his face breaking into a relieved smile. His voice was hoarse from the surgery, but it sounded like music from heaven. The operation was a great success. Even smoother than we anticipated. The child's vital signs are stable, and all indicators are within the expected range. As long as he receives careful post-operative care and we avoid infection, the prognosis for his recovery is very optimistic. Successful. Successful. My mother murmured, a tidal wave of elation crashing over her, breaking down all her defenses. Her legs gave way, and she nearly collapsed. Qinji caught her, his reflexes sharp. This time, my mother didn't push him away. She leaned against his strong arm, and tears, like a bursting dam, flooded down her face. They were not tears of sorrow, but tears of joy, of survival. "Thank you. Thank you." She sobbed, unable to say anything else. Hinji held her tightly, his own eyes, full of gratitude and emotion, fixed on the surgeon. "Thank you for your hard work," he said, his voice raspy. "If there's anything you need from now on, please don't hesitate to let us know." As the news spread, the assistants, nurses, and even some media who had gathered outside breathed a collective sigh of relief. A miracle had happened here. I was transferred to a sterile EQ for post-operative observation. My mother and Kinchi watched me through the glass, sleeping peacefully, my breathing steady. My face was pale, but no longer the heart-stopping shade of blue. After the initial wave of joy, exhaustion washed over my mother. The days and nights of intense mental strain had left her completely drained. Kinchi had his assistant practically force her back to her room to rest. Alone in the room, she lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. After the immense relief, something deeper and more complex began to surface. Just then, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was brief. Hin Zhenfin has been completely stripped of power. His overseas assets are frozen, and he faces multiple charges. Kinchi did it himself. Your revenge, he has delivered it for you. The child's surgery, he has paid for it. When won, you've won. What the Qin family owes you, he will spend the rest of his life repaying. There was no signature. My mother stared at the message for a long, long time. Kinchi had dealt with his own father to avenge her. Her heart felt as if it had been squeezed, an itching, bloating sensation that was both painful and confusing. Was this his atonement? His way of making amends? Had she won? She looked at the setting sun outside the window, its golden light filling the room. She remembered the nights spent washing dishes in the Jianmen courtyard, the humiliating phone call with Lingling, the cold touch of her grandmother's hand, the blue tinge of her child's face. The humiliation, the struggle, the pain, the despair, it all flashed before her eyes. What had she won? She had won her child's life. She had won a chance to start over. But her lost youth, her lost family, her lost faith in love, those could never be returned. Could Kinchi's repayment erase those scars that were carved into her bones? No. She shook her head gently. Some debts could never be repaid. She would accept his help for the child, even accept the business conveniences he provided to build her career. But she would never forgive him. She would never again tie her life to his. What she needed was not Kinchi's repayment, but a fortress of her own making, built with her own two hands, a fortress of strength and dignity. A month later, Rose Courtyard in Jianmen officially opened. There was no grand ribbon-cutting ceremony, no gathering of celebrities. A low, elegant gate opened to welcome the first group of guests who had booked in advance. The courtyard had been transformed. It retained its original Jianmen charm and the wall of climbing roses, but was now a perfect blend of old and new. The flagstone paths, the rustic wooden structures, the carefully arranged tea room and study, the guest rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows for stargazing, every detail echoed the theme of healing and rebirth. It was a place of tranquility and vitality. My mother, dressed in a tailored, modern Xiangsem, her makeup elegant and understated, stood under the old osmanthus tree in the courtyard, gracefully receiving her guests, explaining the design concept and the story of the courtyard. Her demeanor was poised and confident. There was no trace of her former arrogance or her later destitution. The resilience and grace forged in the crucible of suffering gave her a unique radiance. President Wen, this place is truly wonderful, a guest praised sincerely. A quiet retreat in the midst of the hustle and bustle. It has a real soul. Thank you, my mother replied with a genuine smile. I hope this can be a place where everyone can find some peace and rediscover themselves. Kinchi stood by a rose trellis not far away, watching her quietly. He had cleaned up the mess his father had left and was now focusing on the corporation's transformation and here. He didn't approach, didn't interrupt. He just watched her as she moved effortlessly among the guests, as she meticulously arranged every detail. She had succeeded. She had truly stood up on her own. Her success was more dazzling than he had imagined, and it made his heart itch all the more. Because the brighter she shone, the more clearly it illuminated the insurmountable chasm between them. He held me in his arms. I had recovered and been discharged, my cheeks now rosy and full. I wore new clothes and was curiously looking at the beautiful, unfamiliar surroundings, babbling and pointing at the leaves on the trellis. Want to see mommy? Kinchi asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. I waved my chubby little hands in my mother's direction and managed a garbled syllable that sounded like mama. As if she had sensed it, my mother turned. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling her with light. She saw Kinchi, and she saw me in his arms, waving enthusiastically. In that instant, her heart felt as if it had been struck by something soft and powerful. All her defenses, all her icy walls, crumbled in the face of her child's innocent call. She walked over quickly. She didn't look at Kinchi. With a natural, cherished motion, as if reclaiming something precious that had been lost, she took me from his arms and held me close, nuzzling my cheek. "Little Piggy, did you miss Mommy?" "Mama," I tried again, my little head resting contentedly in the crook of her neck. Tears welled up in my mother's eyes. She smiled, letting them fall freely onto my collar. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Kinchi watched this scene, his heart clutched by a hand that was both gentle and sorrowful. He greedily drank in the sight of Wen-1 holding their child, the natural, almost unfamiliar tenderness in her eyes, the unused tears on her cheeks catching the light. The child's dependence, the mother's response, it was a picture he had once dreamed of, but could now only watch from a distance. He swallowed, pushing back the lump in his throat. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, with a barely perceptible tension. The doctor said, "Little Piggy is recovering very well. Faster than expected. He can be discharged next week and go home to the courtyard to rest." The smile on my mother's face faded slightly, but her arms around me remained gentle and firm. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on my curious little face. She gently stroked my nose. "Yes, I know. Everything is ready at Rose Courtyard. Nanny Wang is waiting. He'll receive the best care." She deliberately avoided the word home, and any possible implication in his words. Her home was the Jianmen courtyard her grandmother had left her, now reborn through her own efforts. Her support was the career she had built, brick by brick, and the child in her arms who had been reborn from the ashes of despair. A clear flicker of pain crossed Kinchi's eyes. Her calm and distant manner was more suffocating than any sharp hatred. He understood. The successful surgery had given their child a future, but it could not bridge the abyss between them, an abyss steeped in betrayal, pain, and despair. "That's good," he managed to say, the 3 words seeming to take all his strength. Silence fell again, broken only by my babbling as I clutched my mother's collar. After a long moment, Kinchi spoke again, his voice even lower, almost pleading. "Wen-1, I know anything I say is meaningless. The harm I've caused. I can never make up for it in this lifetime. But the child needs a father. Legally, I am still his father." Kinchi. My mother finally looked up, interrupting him. Her eyes were clear and bright, like the sky after a Jianmen rain. There was no hatred, no resentment, only a calm finality, and an unquestionable distance. "The rights the law gives you, I will not take away. You will have visitation rights. I will inform you of any major decisions concerning the child. That is his right, and yours." She paused, her gaze meeting the roiling pain and hope in his eyes, her tone gentle but resolute. "But that's all. Kinchi, there is too much between us. Things that can't be erased by an apology or a successful act of atonement. What your father did, your own choices, and those years I spent struggling in the mud. They all happened. They are carved into my bones. I am grateful that you saved my child. I accept the provisions you've made for him, because he deserves them. But you and I." She shook her head slightly, a faint, almost relieved smile on her lips. It was a smile without mockery, only the peace of someone who has seen through it all. "There is no future for us. My future is Rose Courtyard, my career, and this little life in my arms that I need to love and protect with all my strength. As for you, Kinchi, let go of the past. Let yourself go. You have your own life to live. You don't need to be shackled to a debt that can never be repaid." Her words were like a precision scalpel, calmly cutting away all the tangled, ambiguous vines of possibility, leaving only a clear, cold boundary. The color drained from Kinchi's face. His tall frame swayed almost imperceptibly. He looked into her clear, attachment-free eyes, looked at the child who was so trustingly dependent on her, and his heart felt as if a piece had been carved out, leaving an empty, aching void. He had anticipated her hatred, her coldness, even her revenge. He had never anticipated this. This calm, complete letting go. He realized that the ultimate punishment was not hatred, but indifference and no longer being needed. All the words he had prepared, all the promises he had wanted to make, crumbled before her calm verdict. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He could only lower his head, his tall figure casting a long, lonely shadow in the bright hallway. My mother no longer looked at him. She turned and walked towards the room, holding me. "Little Piggy, let's go get some milk." Her voice was gentle, filled with the lightness of someone whose burdens had finally been laid to rest, as if the heart-wrenching conversation had never happened. At the end of the hallway, the sun streamed through a large window, casting bright patches of light on the floor. My mother, holding her child, walked steadily, step by step, towards the new future that belonged to them, and them alone. Her silhouette was thin but straight, like a rose that had weathered the storm and still bloomed defiantly. Kinchi stood where he was for a long, long time. He watched the door close in front of him, as if separating two worlds. He understood. He had lost her completely. Not on the day they divorced, but in this very moment. In the moment he saw the calm, vast future in her eyes, a future in which he had no place. His path to redemption, perhaps, had only just begun. But the object of that redemption was now only himself and the little life that was legally his son, but would never truly belong to him again. The roses in the Jianen courtyard bloomed and faded, season after season. Rose Courtyard's reputation grew, becoming a gem on the Jianen cultural tourism map. My mother was no longer Miss Wen, nor Qinqi's XY. She was President Wen, the legend who had bloomed from despair. Her life was busy and fulfilling, managing the guest house, studying business, monitoring my every medical report, watching me grow from a wobbly toddler to a little boy chasing the white cat, Xuchuan, around the courtyard. Her smiles became more frequent, the shadows in her eyes chased away by sunlight and contentment. Qinqi kept his promise. Through his lawyer, he paid a huge sum of money, far exceeding basic child support, on time, ensuring I received the best medical care, upbringing, and material conditions. He visited regularly, never overstepping his bounds. Sometimes on a weekend, sometimes on an afternoon. He would bring expensive educational toys that I was probably still too young for, and then sit quietly at the stone table in the courtyard, watching me play with Xuchuan, watching Wen calmly manage the affairs of the guesthouse. Their conversations were limited to the most polite pleasantries. How has the child been lately? The weather is getting cooler. Make sure to dress warmly. He watched her become more and more radiant, watched as admiring gazes began to follow her, watched as she gently but firmly rejected them or kept them at a distance. He was like a well-behaved guest, a familiar stranger. Another year, the roses were in full bloom, the pink and white blossoms climbing the walls, their rich fragrance filling the warm, humid air. My mother was pruning the flowers in the courtyard. I, in my little overalls, was squatting by a flower, clumsily trying to water a flower, getting my face and hands covered in mud. Qinqi sat in a rattan chair not far away, watching quietly, the sunlight filtering through the leaves and dappling him with light. My mother snipped off a perfect rose and walked over to me. She squatted down and gently touched my cheek with the flower. Little piggy, look. Isn't the flower pretty? Pretty. I grinned, showing a few little white teeth, and reached out with my muddy hands to grab it. My mother laughed and dodged, then placed the flower in a glass bottle filled with water on the stone table. When it's fully bloomed, we'll give it to Grandma Zhang for her birthday, okay? Okay, I nodded vigorously. Qinqi's gaze fell on the rose in the water on the stone table. It was vibrant, beautiful, breathtaking, but it had been cut from its branch. He stood up. It's getting late, he said, his voice gentle. I should go. My mother looked up and nodded at him, her manner polite and distant. Okay. Be careful on the road. Qinqi took one last, long look at the little figure playing carefree among the flowers, then at the vibrant rose on the table. He turned and left. The heavy wooden gate of the courtyard closed softly behind him, shutting out the sunshine, the fragrance of the flowers, and the innocent laughter of a child. The wind in the alley carried the sweet scent of roses. Qinqi got into his car but didn't start it immediately. He took out his phone. The screensaver was a candid photo, Wen holding a newly recovered me, standing in front of the rose wall at Rose Courtyard, her eyes crinkled in a smile. The sun shone on them, warm and bright. It was the beginning of their new life, and a world he could never enter again. He closed his eyes for a moment, then started the car. The sound of the engine was swallowed by the warm Jianen wind. Inside the courtyard, my mother picked me up, tired and covered in mud, and carried me inside. Xuchuan followed lazily behind. Time for a bath, little piggy. We'll get you all clean and smelling sweet like a flower. I giggled. The wall of roses bloomed even more brilliantly in the warm afternoon sun. The petals swayed gently in the breeze, silently watching over this courtyard, over the resilient life that bloomed within it, and over the splendid, peaceful years that no longer needed to depend on anyone else.